Hi, my name's Hannah Engelkamp. I used to be a magazine editor, editing a magazine about positive environmentalism and slow travel, especially based in the UK. And then a few years after that, I decided to embark on my own adventure, which was walking around Wales with a donkey. 1,000 miles, the full circumnavigation. And it took us just under 6 months, of which around about half of it, we were actually friends, which seemed like a triumph. For me, the greatest triumph of the walk was that it really rewrote new meanings into space and into time. Or I should probably say that it rewrote old meanings into space and time, because there was a reality about the experience that it's hard to find these days, I think. For example, we were often walking on drovers' roads and green lanes with the donkey, and these were paths in which people have been walking at human walking speed for hundreds, if not tens of thousands even, of years. And where the donkey was where we were. There was no cheating, there was no getting a bus or a taxi, there was no catching ourselves up. We were with the donkey. He wouldn't go over stiles, sometimes he wouldn't go through rivers, and we were completely tied to him. Space also rewrote a kind of an old, time also rewrote an old meaning, in as much as it wasn't possible to fake affection like we often do these days. So there were quite a few occasions where we'd be staying in somebody's house, and Chico would be in the garden or the field outside. And I would suddenly have this desire to text him to make sure that he was okay. And of course you can't do that with a non-verbal relationship of that sort. There's no cheating time. The responsibility didn't come easy. I'd never owned an animal before. And yet, as often people find, I think, it turned out that he was a bit of a gateway drug. And so only a couple of years later, I ended up having a baby called Oshan. And he's now nearly 3 years old. And then I began to learn a thing or two about the real meaning of time. It turns out that you're not really supposed to leave a baby in the field overnight. And so it blew my mind. It seems a strange thing to say, but it blew my mind that 100% of his time has to be accounted for, has to be accompanied, or at least it has to be scheduled, and that generally falls to me. This is not something that sat easily with me, and the sense of overwhelm that it gave me. I'm kind of an old mother, and I've been an adult for over half of my life, and to have to rewrite my identity to take him into consideration has been quite a big deal. I felt quite unhinged for an awful lot of that time. I haven't really been able to walk. I mean, he loves to walk, but he doesn't have much of a sense of the linear aspect of walking that I was quite a fan of before. And I haven't really been able to write in the way that I was able to before, because the kind of ponderous wanderings of a writer don't really fit very well into nursery time. So I've really questioned my own identity over these last 3 years. And there's also the fact that I found myself unhinged between my own moods. I haven't even had that as an anchor. I have gone from being sort of bursting with joy and love, which is obviously helped by this heavy-handed hormonal existence where nature makes sure slowly that you adore this child and that you, for reasons known to somebody, I hope, actually volunteer to do it again. And then at the other end of the scale, there's this fast, hot fury that comes from being somebody's climbing frame and somebody's towel and hand wipe and servant, and in a way from somebody's god. It's too much. It's all too much. And I looked into it and discovered that there is a term for this. There's a small and very sort of hotly argued genre of work called Maternal Ambivalence, in which just a small number of mothers dare to write about the experience of feeling this love and this hate at the same time. Ambivalence has rather come to mean feeling a bit near and in the middle, but actually the real meaning of ambivalence is feeling two things, converse things very strongly at the same time. And actually this is quite a rich state to be in if you're able to find time to think, ever. But it's a very unfashionable state at the moment. What we like at the moment is something that you can decide on an argument that you can put yourself behind. It's Twitter, goodies and baddies. It's expressing your feelings in 250 characters, or at the very most in 18 minutes. It doesn't fit very well with the TED Talk either as a format. And I have found myself laughing in a highly Instagrammable family way, only a couple of hours maybe before finding myself crying on the toilet with the sheer overwhelm of the situation. It's always on the toilet for some reason. I think it might just be that's when you get a couple, if you're lucky, a couple of moments to yourself, and that's all it takes. Despite there being a wide range of schools of parenting that people tend to hold quite dearly, the solution that all of them seem to posit that I have found is that structure is the answer, increasing the structure of your life. Children need structure, they need routine, they need discipline. And for me, if I'm not getting what I need is more time away from him, perhaps to give up this ponderous freelance life and get a proper job, something where there's at least one constant in my life, something that I can stick to. And I really do try this, but I fail and I fail all the time. And every time that I fold him into the buggy using my elbow while he's wailing, or I stop something that he's clearly really into so that we can go on to the next thing, or I mention clocks, which he knows nothing and cares nothing about, it just takes little bites out of my soul. And I see myself in him, because I'm not terribly good at timekeeping myself. And after 20 years of being an adult, I guess I'm rather hoping that maybe I'll come to terms with that it's a good thing about me, that it stems from being unrealistic about how long things will take, and from essentially maybe that's from a general optimism about life, but certainly about an engagement, because I'll definitely be late arriving, but I will definitely be late leaving as well. Essentially, I think he is a little animal, and I'm coming to realise that is something that I really admire and actually envy in him. I've got, all being well, a huge animal event coming up very soon, and it's going to be an occasion in which I need to stop thinking with my executive function front brain like a grown-up, and I need to tap into my animal back brain, my brain stem, and go somewhere dark and somewhere safe and crawl around on all fours and make terrifying noises and have this baby. And my cervix recently found out that it's supposed to dilate by 1 centimetre every 2 hours. And immediately, you can see it became insubordinate about it. And I felt the same way as well. It's just an animal event that doesn't conform to scheduling in that way. And I hope that it's all going to go well. And I'm excited that motherhood, starting with birth, gives you this opportunity to access your animal self. And then ongoing motherhood, I think, as well, as you socialise your child, you get this amazing privilege of seeing the animal in them, and maybe, for me, possibly, even learning a few things from him as well. It seems to me a rich state of mind, a rich state of being, a rich place to live if I can get it right. And I feel like just to adhere myself to structure would actually be a shame. It would actually potentially lose a lot of that richness just for the admittedly probably considerable relief of having dinner on the table every day at 6 o'clock. So we had a plan. We decided to run away, or I decided on our behalf that Oshan and I would run away, and we would go and camp, and we would live somewhere with no facilities, and we would sleep when it was dark and wake up when it was light, and we would eat when we were hungry, and we would forage for food, and we would cook on a bonfire. And I left as commitment to this idea my laptop and my phone and even my watch I left behind, and we headed off to have an adventure. An adventure is interesting. In my previous magazine editing role, I rubbed shoulders with a lot of adventurers, and we seem to be in an interesting moment where adventure is potentially, and I really hope it is, moving away from a kind of Shackleton, glory-seeking, summit-finding idea of conquer, I guess, of adventure, and moving perhaps towards a more immersed, more engaged idea of seeking the inner and the outer at the same time, seeking the mystery in the world perhaps. And there's all sorts of interesting books at the moment where people are doing this by training a goshawk, or collecting hoverflies, or building dry stone walls. People slowing down and finding something real in their lives. And the poet Patrick Kavanagh said, "To know fully even one field or one land is a lifetime's experience. In the world of poetic experience, it's depth that counts, not width." So we went to seek depth, and Oshan loved it easily, of course. We went to Cambrian Wildwood, which is a nearby piece of rewilding land that hasn't been grazed in 6 years, and the depth is already starting to get back, the little saplings and the jewels in the grass, this depth coming back, natural depth, to the wide, sheep-bitten landscape. And there were no facilities there except, of course, the abundant riches of well-watered Welsh land. And we camped there for a couple of weeks, and rewilding, it was surrounded by this rewilding land, where rewilding is a bit about, in a way, taking human beings who are doing such a bad job in many ways off the hook, and allowing the land to rewild itself, for the land to actually, rather than harping back to a kind of conservation past, that the land takes itself forward. And it's interesting that Cambrian Wildwood actually mention on their website that this rewilding ought to include a de-domestication of human beings, and that by domesticating plants and animals and landscapes for the thousands of years, 7,000 years, we have de-domesticated ourselves, and that has had taken an enormous toll on us in terms of our connection, losing our connection to nature. So Oshan and I explored the landscape. We had blackberry pancakes, we smashed up hazelnuts, we wrote little song lines through the purple moorgrass and the bracken, and we settled down slowly. Jay Griffiths, the author of Kith, which is a book about wildness and children, she says, "By the clock, each hour is numerical and standardised. Time itself, however, is variegated. Children live happily in this wild time, untamable, full of character, full of difference. And in this way, time has codes for the child's psyche. Dawn, wide open, when time stretches untrapped, can nurture a child's sense of dawn within, when the mind can bask extravagantly in an open moment." Now, for me, dawn every day included a kind of pre-terror of the expected boredom and the responsibility for this open moment that Jay talks about, that essentially I was going to have to dispatch with another whole day of things to do. But slowly I did calm down, and I realised bit by bit that I was being let off these hooks of modern parenting, where my life with Oshan's is just too close. We're too much everything for each other, and it's not good for either of us. And as the heavens slowly turned day after day, I realised that Oshan was starting to get his cues, and of course I was as well, from the light in the sky. And bedtime has always been a fight, and suddenly he was preempting it hours earlier because the light was starting to die, and bedtime was never a problem. He put himself to bed and he slept soundly. And I was let off as the sort of supreme god of timekeeping that I have been since he was born. And space, the same. He stretched the umbilical cord as we sat there in this boundaryless area, and after a couple of weeks, rather than me being his constant climbing frame, he was actually wandering away and merrily hiding our cutlery underneath bilberry bushes while I was actually able to read a couple of pages of my book. And I discovered that I was, not entirely, but beginning to be let off as this supreme god of entertainment of his. And risk as well. I was let off as the god of risk assessments, because he came without having, a high surface that I could do things that excluded him. He came across knives and the axe and the fire and toadstools and nettles, and developed at 2.5 his own sense of responsibility for them, and became accustomed to them, became curious about them, but also explored them. And he also dealt with his own injuries in an interesting way. So I would see him hurt himself, and rather than running to me as he would have in the past, he would figure it out and sort it out, and sometimes kind of nibble at them like a little animal. And it was wonderful to see that he was able to exercise his will and understand himself in a new way. J. Griffiths again says, "Through a freedom of will, self-regulation may be strengthened. This is exactly the kind of self-regulation that children learn in free play, in unscheduled time." And so we came back to real life, and he and I just know it isn't real life now. And although we reacclimatised well, we speak of the magic of it often between ourselves quietly. We speak of the grand orange moon rising one day and the spider webs covered in dew and the time he sprayed insect repellent in his eyes. And I don't know what the conclusion is here, because I've re-entered ordinary life, and in the couple of months since then I have gained a dishwasher and a washer dryer, and these things are wonderful to me. So I don't really know how to take this forward, apart from the fact that in the back of my mind, in my animal brainstem perhaps, I have these memories, and I know that when I feel overwhelmed now as a parent going forward, that all of this is only one way of doing it, and actually, looking at it seriously, the problems that I have with parenting are more to do with modern parenting than they are to do with my own small animal child. Thank you very much.